Hello, Mordimers here, and welcome to the third part of Chess for Beginners. And this time I would like to show you the most basic possible endgame. So we have, of course, the kings, and one of the sides have the rook. Now we have to know how to checkmate with confidence, because if this happens and we cannot checkmate in 50 moves, that means that's gonna be a draw, because there is the rule in chess: if we don't have the moves by the pawn, we don't have the capture for 50 moves of white, 50 moves of black, then this would end in a draw. So sometimes if we play some blitz or bullet, or even the regular game, but we have 30 seconds on the clock, we have to know how to do that immediately. So this is the position which can happen, and I will explain you how this could potentially happen. So for example, we have the position like this. We have the rooks, both of the sides have the rook, but white also have the pawn. Very often this is just a draw. In this case, of course, it's winning, because white can promote to the queen, and black cannot do much about that, can take this queen after promotion, but that means, of course, we're gonna have the basic position which I just show you. Now, how to win? The only way to win is push the king to the edge of the board. So the winning position looks like this. The king has to be on the edge, and our king has to actually control the three squares, and then we deliver the checkmate. And this is the checkmate because the king is checked and also has no moves. So this is, of course, winning, and this is also what we want to achieve. So let's go back to our position. What to do now? For black has to be as much annoying as possible. That means if the checkmate is possible only on the edge, the king has to go as far from the edge as possible. That means to the center. But if we go with the king to the e4 square, in this case, we're gonna have the kings in the opposite. It's called opposition in chess, and that means this king gonna control all of these squares. So if the king goes to e4, in the next move, the king will be forced to actually move to the f file. So closer and closer to the edge. So the best move in this position would be king to e5. Of course, black cannot, stop being the checkmate, but can make it as hard as possible for white to deliver. Now, there are two ways for the beginners how to actually deliver the checkmate. The fastest way is just lock the king in the box. So for now, in this box, this is the way to do. So how to deliver that? We play rook d4. Now the rook control all of these squares, so of course the king cannot go anywhere there, have to go to one of these squares, doesn't really matter where. So for example, king e6, and we just follow with the rook. We make this box smaller and smaller. So let's say king f6. Now if we move the rook, then we're gonna lose the rook for free. That means we have to bring the king. And now king e6, and again, if we deliver the check too early, then the king will escape from the box. We can, set up another box, but that's not the point. So we make another move with the king, and after king f6, we just lock the king in this box, and then in this box, and so on. So for example, king g7, very important is cooperation between the king and the rook, because rook cannot deliver the checkmate alone. So king e5, let's say king g6, now king e6, and after king g7, there are two ways, but we follow only the box. So rook f6, the box is smaller and smaller, king g8, and after rook f7, we stop for a while. This is the smallest box possible. We don't want to make this box smaller. This can be very, very dangerous. So this is what you have to know. Of course, there is only one move, king h8, now king f6, king g8. Of course, again, if we deliver the check, then the king will escape. So the king should, go to the corner. And after king g6, king h8, I hope you would not make the box smaller, because that would be the disaster. If the rook goes to g7, this would be the stalemate, and that's just a draw. So in this position, we have to just deliver the checkmate. Don't make this box smaller. So that's very, very important. Of course, once you are a little bit more advanced, you will start to see other things that you can, for example, deliver the check immediately, because the king also control a couple of squares here. And now if the king goes to h6, it's already on the edge, so the king can come to f6 just to protect the rook, and the king has to move to this small box. So you're gonna start to see things like that. And if the king goes to the f8, this is also very tricky, because this king actually already controls all of these squares, and the rook controls these squares. So if black moves to e8, we're gonna deliver the checkmate in next move. You can think how to do that for white. There is the checkmate in 2 moves. So white have to move the rook on any of these squares. So any move is good here. For example, rook g1, waiting move, and the king has nowhere to go. There is only one square, e8, and we're gonna have the checkmate. So if you are a little bit more advanced, if you start to see these little nuances on the board, that's the way to go also. With boxings, as I just show you, there is always the risk that you can deliver the stalemate. And this sometimes happens for the kids or for the very, very early beginners who just know the moves, and they try to deliver this checkmate. They know already the rule, they have to box, and at the end they box until the end, and then there is a draw. So that would be disaster. So I will show you one more way. It's a little bit longer. It takes 5 to 10 more moves. However, there is a risk free of the stalemate. So what we want to do, we choose one of the edges. So in this case, it would be this edge or this edge, and we have to push the king over there. So how to do that? First, we move the rook to the opposite side. What we want to do is just cut off the king here, and once the king is on the f file, moving somewhere there, just bring the rook to this file, and then once the king just follows, we're gonna, cut off him in the smaller area, and so on. So that's what we want to do. So for example, king e4, we have this opposition. So what we want to do is deliver the check now. So the king has to be moved, as all of these squares are controlled by white. So for example, king f3, we're gonna follow with the king, king d4. Not king d3. King d3 is also possible, but king d4 would be more precise. Why? Because if the king goes to f4, that would be the opposition, then of course we're gonna check again, and the king would have to move to the g file. So the king probably doesn't want to go there, probably want to attack the rook, and now of course we cannot make the mistake. If we follow the king, we're gonna lose the rook. That would be the disaster. So this is why first we have to move the rook just to opposite side. The rook is the long range piece, so it's of course much faster than the king. The king has very short legs, so now he wants to follow the rook. So king f3, but as you see, it's very, very slow. And here is the trick. The king is in the right position, want to control all of these squares. We want this king to follow, and then we want to bring the rook to f8. So of course, if the king goes to the d3, then the king will go to the f4. If we follow the king, then he will escape. So what we want to do is just make a waiting move. Rook e7. waiting move, and now the king goes to f4, and we gonna do our trick. And then again, after king g5, we go king e4. Again, not the opposition here, which is also possible. I will just also show you that. And after king g6, we just move the rook to f1, and then we make this waiting move. So all of this is well known. Of course, if the king comes to g4, we gonna deliver this check, and we gonna have the king on the edge. So the king probably would start to run, but we follow this. We follow like the knight shadow. This is, you see, the knight shadow, and we just follow this king. So the king tries to escape, we follow. The king tries to escape. Of course, we can, lock the king in the box, but if we don't want to, risk the stalemate, we are not sure about our skills, then we just follow, and then we deliver the check. And again, all of these squares are controlled by the white pieces, by the rook and by the king. So king h6, and again, we just follow the knight shadow, and we follow king h5, king f6, king h4, and so on. The rook, of course, at the end goes to g8, and after king h4, we make this waiting move, and now we just gonna checkmate. The king cannot escape because this is the end of the board. So at the end, we would have this beautiful checkmate. So that's the way to go. Of course, white doesn't need to cooperate and go immediately to e4 just to get, pushed to the edge, but can escape on the e file. So again, we can use the box, or if we don't want to, we just follow with the king. So king e7, we follow, and now if the king goes, of course, to e6, you know what to do. But if the king goes immediately to f6, so want to skip that, then this is good for us because we can cut off the king immediately. So what we want to do is not bringing the king to the center, to the king, but first we just cut off the king. Bang! We cut off the king, and now the king cannot get to the e file. So probably king f5, and now we can, follow like the knight shadow. We can follow the king. We also can go immediately to d5. Now the point is that if the king goes to f4, we immediately can jump to e8 without this waiting move which I just show you. So after king f3, king d4, king f2, king d3, king f1. Again, in this position, most of the players would just set up the box, then bring the king and deliver the checkmate. But if you are not, confident, then still you can play king d2, then of course rook f8, and after king g3, you just simply follow. So king g4, immediately bring the rook to the another side, and if the king goes to the g3, we deliver the check, and the king gonna be on the edge. So it's, as you see, this is not possible. This position is pretty much logical, straightforward. You don't need to think at all. You just follow this king, like a vulture who follows the king and waiting until he make the mistakes and go to g6, which finally at the end he has to do, and we gonna have the king on the edge. Then we just follow again, and after king h5, again rook g8. If the king goes to h6, then we gonna deliver the checkmate and win the game. So probably we would have to run after the king, and at the end we would have the checkmate. Now, what are the disasters, the mistakes which I just show you? First, of course, is a draw by the boxing, the king in the corner. Or here, it's also possible that if we have the situation, let's say like this, and we want to, follow the king, make this shadow knight run, then we're gonna lose the rook for free. We have to be always very aware that the rook is not defended by the king, and that would be the disaster. So this is the second way how we can screw up this game. And finally, if we have this position, everything is fine. We need about 25 moves in the worst possible way of delivering the checkmate. So as you see, it's a lot, plenty of time. We still have 25 extra moves, but sometimes you want to bring the king to help to coordinate the action with the rook, and instead of playing something like king e5, you're gonna go with the king to f4. And suddenly the rook doesn't control all of these squares here. All of these squares are not controlled by the rook because the king is blocking. This is also very, very common mistakes by the beginners, because now the king can escape from our net. We can deliver the check, but the king is already escaping. And now we have to bring the rook to this rank and try to push the king over there. But if we make this mistake a couple of times, that's gonna be a draw. 50 moves and that's gonna be a draw. So that's the checkmate by the rook, the lone rook, and this is why this is very, very important. First end game you always learn is this one. So if you like this video, if you see this valuable, press like. If for some reason you don't like it, press unlike. And if you don't want to miss another lessons for the beginners, press subscribe, smash the bell button. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.